They told him to get up, said that seat wasn't meant for someone like him. A black man, sitting silently in business class, uncovered the true face of an entire system, just by being there. The chief flight attendant, pale-skinned with blazing red lipstick, pointed her finger inches from his face and said, "Passengers like you don't have a ticket for this section." In the row behind, a white CEO smirked with condescension. The whole cabin froze in silence. No one spoke up, because everyone believed that black man clearly didn't belong in their world. Until the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the runway. A convoy of military vehicles pulled up right beside the plane, and the man they had come to receive was him. The president, still calmly seated in 2A. He didn't get angry, didn't raise his voice. He just looked at them and let them bow their heads on their own. This story isn't just about the color of one's skin. It's about how an entire world passes judgment before it ever bothers to ask who you are. Early morning at Orly Airport, Paris. The air was sharp and cold. The sunlight hadn't yet reached the fogged glass windows. Amid the soft rumble of rolling suitcases, a man of color walked slowly into the boarding lounge. His faded grey coat, worn-out sneakers, and a plain grey canvas backpack without any logo hung quietly from his shoulder. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't look around. No one was with him. No one paid attention. Just another solitary African passenger, walking in the invisibility that the world so often casts on men like him. He picked a plastic seat by the window and sat down gently, took out his phone, opened his email, and began reading, patiently, calmly, in complete silence. Security officers passed by. None stopped. A group of businessmen laughed loudly in the distance, talking about new mining projects in Central Africa. Not one of them looked at the man by the window, because nothing about him seemed important. But what they didn't know. His name was Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, just returning from a high-level summit in Brussels on gold mining rights and economic sovereignty for the African continent. And this flight was the journey home of a leader. Without a crown, without an entourage. Because Ibrahim believes true power doesn't need to be paraded. It only needs to be placed in the hands of someone who knows how to hold it, in silence. The boarding door had just opened. The cabin air was still quiet. The click of high heels, the rumble of rolling luggage, the usual boarding group announcements echoed through the space, just like any other day. Until a man stormed into the priority boarding area. His stride urgent, his face flushed red with frustration. Luc Morel, age 55, CEO of an energy conglomerate operating in over 12 African nations. Tailored navy suit, deep red silk tie, and silver-framed glasses perfectly balanced on a sharp, straight nose. He was late, and when told that business class was already full, he stood frozen in the terminal, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "I'm a strategic partner of Burkina Faso. You want me to sit in economy? Who made that ridiculous decision?" A phone call was made, an email forwarded, a legal threat tossed out like a rehearsed habit. Within minutes, the ground staff grew uneasy. They scrambled over walkie-talkies. And finally, a decision was made. Call the head flight attendant. Ask her to handle it discreetly, if someone can be persuaded to give up their seat. That's when Lucienne entered. From a distance, she commanded attention. Not because of authority, but because of attitude. Lucienne Arnaud, 48 years old, senior international flight attendant. White, broad-shouldered, heavy-set. Her stride landed with weight. Each step sinking slightly into the cabin floor. Her face thick with makeup. Her lips painted a defiant shade of red, as if her lipstick alone claimed ownership of the cabin. Her blonde hair pulled tightly into a bun, every strand drawn back as tight as her nerves upon hearing that a VIP passenger urgently needed a seat. Lucienne didn't ask who was who. She didn't look at the passenger list. She marched straight into business class, eyes scanning the room. Until they landed on row 2. There sat Ibrahim Traoré, in a simple grey coat, calm eyes, quietly reading the news on his phone, unaware that he had just become a target. Lucienne glanced at the boarding pass in her hand. She didn't need confirmation. She didn't need a reason. She just needed one thing. That man doesn't look like someone who belongs in business class. Lucienne stepped in front of Ibrahim. She didn't ask for his name. She didn't check the system. "Sir, due to a scheduling issue, we need to rearrange some seating. Would you mind moving to the economy cabin?" Ibrahim looked up. His face was calm, not irritated, not surprised. He quietly reached into his coat and pulled out his ticket, holding it out gently with one hand. "Business class, seat 2A, high-level priority." Lucienne glanced at it. Not even 2 seconds. Then she looked back at him. This time, with a gaze that said, without saying, "How could someone like you be sitting here?" She returned the ticket with a slight nod. No thank you. No apology. Then turned and walked away, trying to maintain her professionalism, but her eyes betrayed her. They carried something unmistakable. Contempt. What she didn't know was that the man she had just judged, based on a faded grey coat, held veto power over a €300 million gas project that her own country had been lobbying for. Lucienne returned to seat 2A. The same face greeted her, calm, still, silent. She stood straight, both hands folded neatly in front of her, a performance of professional courtesy. Ibrahim looked up, met her eyes, no sharpness, no tension. He simply asked in a voice soft as air, "Why was I chosen?" Lucienne blinked. Clearly she hadn't expected him to ask, let alone ask like that. "Oh, nothing personal, sir," she replied, trying to sound composed. "Just a technical adjustment, to balance the cabin seating." Ibrahim tilted his head slightly, his gaze still locked on hers. "Then you should ask everyone, not just me." A heavy silence fell, as if the cabin itself had lost all air. Lucienne held in a breath, forced a smile, and turned away. "People like that always complicate everything," she muttered under her breath, low enough not to be recorded, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. 2 rows behind, an African nurse leaned toward her seatmate and whispered, "They have no idea who that man is." Her friend glanced over, eyes narrowing. He looks so ordinary, but there's something about him no one dares touch. Moments later, Lucienne opened the passenger manifest. Her finger scanned down the list, searching, marking. This time there were no names asked, no polite requests. Only those with skin dark enough were invited to voluntarily assist with seating realignment. Lucienne had begun looking for more candidates to move, and they all had one thing in common: dark skin, quiet presence, and no one important enough to notice. Lucienne returned once more. She had just forced a young black man to move to economy, without explanation, without a hint of regret. And now, she stood once again before Ibrahim. She didn't speak, didn't invite, didn't demand. She simply stood, with a look that expected one thing: for a man to know his place, and leave quietly. But this time, Ibrahim stood up. Not abruptly, not startled, just simply rose to his feet. No raised voice, no flash of anger, no display of dominance. He just stood and looked at Lucienne, as if seeing right into something she had never been forced to face. He held that gaze for a long moment. No one in the cabin spoke. A woman stopped chewing her gum mid-bite. A French businessman across the aisle slowly set his espresso back on the tray. Lucienne didn't feel like she was being looked at. She felt like she was being unmasked. Stripped of the role, the uniform, the practiced smiles and company policies she thought could shield her. And then he spoke. Not loud, not fast, but every word struck like a knock against her very core. To judge someone by their skin is to proudly declare your own ignorance. Lucienne said nothing. She just felt a chill crawl up her spine, even though the cabin temperature hadn't changed. She turned and walked away. Not because she realized she was wrong, but because there were no words left to justify the look she had chosen to wear. Ibrahim sat back down. He didn't speak again. He didn't have to. Right at that moment, Luc Morel, the French CEO, stepped into the cabin. A white napkin was laid across his seat. A flute of sparkling wine handed to him. Lucienne offered her most professional smile of the day. "Monsieur Morel, bienvenue. Your seat is ready." What Lucienne didn't know was that she had just demoted a head of state to make room for the very man whose country would be expelled by that head of state within the month. The plane began its descent. Outside the window, Burkina Faso slowly emerged beneath the blazing red light of dawn. Red soil, dry forests, corrugated metal rooftops glinting under the sun, and a long line of black SUVs parked neatly along the runway. Luc Morel smirked, adjusting his tie. "Ah, looks like they're here for me." He raised his eyebrows at Lucienne, as if ready to walk down a red carpet. The cabin buzzed with activity as everyone prepared for landing. Crew members rushed to their stations. Lucienne furrowed her brow. Something felt off. The plane's wheels had barely touched down when a unit of black uniformed officers marched directly onto the tarmac. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Then, a high-ranking officer appeared, posture rigid, face solemn. He boarded first. He didn't stop at the cabin door. He didn't ask a flight attendant. He didn't glance around. He walked straight to seat 2A, paused, raised his hand in a formal salute and spoke with a voice like thunder breaking the silence. "Mr. President, welcome home?" The entire cabin fell dead silent. You could hear people gasp. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand. Lucienne stood frozen, her fingers clenched around the seat manifest, before it slipped from her grip and hit the floor. Luc Morel jumped up, not because he'd been called, but because he hadn't. His face went pale. "President," he stammered, his eyes now locked on the man he and Lucienne had silently belittled the entire flight. Ibrahim was still seated, still calm. He didn't look around. He didn't smile. He didn't flare with pride or rage. He simply stood, fastened the top button of his coat, nodded to the officer, and in that moment, the entire business-class cabin slowly bowed their heads. No one was told to. No one was forced. But true power makes the world go quiet, just by being there. The metal staircase had barely touched the plane when the summons took effect. Lucienne, still trying to grasp what was happening, was asked to disembark first. She walked, each step heavier than the last, as if her shoes had turned to lead. Her once vivid red lipstick was now streaked with sweat. The sharpness in her eyes was gone, replaced by nothing but a vacant stare. Luc Morel followed behind, no longer the powerful CEO, just a man in a suit, flanked by 4 uniformed officers, his face pale as ash. The Burkinabe Security Authority received both of them right there at the airport. No harsh accusations, no dramatic charges, but the message was heavier than any verdict. Insulting the representative of a head of state will be investigated thoroughly under a transparent legal process. That afternoon, the airline issued a press release. We sincerely apologize for the incident aboard flight AF872. Customer respect is our highest priority. We are reviewing our training protocols. Empty words, tone deaf, and far too late. Meanwhile, the internet exploded. Respect Africa? He sat in 2A. Lucienne must apologize. Short clips emerged from fellow passengers. Lucienne, frowning at Ibrahim. Luc Morel's smug grin as he entered the cabin. And then, the moment the officer saluted, Mr. President. At a short press briefing with the African media, a French reporter asked, Mr. President, do you intend to press charges? Ibrahim smiled. A small smile, but it carried weight. I don't want them punished. I want them to learn how to see people, not through prejudice, but through human eyes. No one said another word. The next morning, Ibrahim Traoré arrived right on time at the presidential palace of Burkina Faso. No press coverage, no interviews, not a single mention of yesterday's flight. He met with his cabinet, reviewed agricultural development plans, answered a student's question at Ouaga University about strategies for a self-reliant Africa, and smiled softly as his aide brought him coffee. No sugar, just the way he liked it. No one brought up the incident, but the entire nation knew, and beyond its borders. He didn't need to prove his status with security escorts, titles, or power plays. He simply sat where he belonged and let the truth speak for itself. Lucienne was suspended. Luc Morel lost the largest investment deal in West Africa in 15 years. The airline launched a new campaign, diversity and respect. But none of the apologies came out of fear. They came because they finally understood. The silence of someone who knows who they are will always make those who think they're above bow their heads.